Hi, I'm Olivia. My sister stole my inheritance the day after our mother was buried. I didn't find out until 3 weeks later when the lawyer called and asked why I had signed off on everything. Except I hadn't. The signature wasn't mine. It looked close enough that someone who didn't know me wouldn't question it. But I knew. And the person who knew my handwriting just as well, maybe better, was Clarissa, my only sister, older by 3 years. She always knew how to make her lies sound like apologies and her betrayals feel like favors. That day, the lawyer sounded unsure, like he'd just realized he might be talking to the wrong criminal.
I didn't yell.
I didn't even ask for details. I thanked him, hung up, and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the stack of sympathy cards I hadn't opened. They felt heavier then. Like maybe they were warning signs I hadn't understood in time. The funeral had been a blur. Clarissa had handled most of the arrangements. She said I was too emotional, too disorganized. I let her. Grief made me soft. She was practical, detached, already talking in the past tense while I still couldn't bring myself to clean out Mom's medicine drawer. The day of the will reading, she said, she had a migraine. Said I should go alone. I'd assumed she'd already known what it said. I hadn't.
I didn't even stay for the whole thing.
Mom had left most of her savings, the house, and a modest trust fund to be split evenly between us. The lawyer had said the paperwork was ready for signatures and would be processed in a few weeks. I didn't think to follow up. I didn't know I needed to. The betrayal didn't hit like a slap. It felt like ice melting on my skin, slow and wet and shameful. I remembered the night Clarissa brought me a cup of tea after the funeral, the way she kissed my forehead and said, "It's justice now." I had cried then, grateful. Now I wondered if she'd already stolen from me by that point. I opened my laptop and searched for her name. Her social profiles were gone. Even her email bounced back. I called her phone once. Straight to voicemail. The next morning I drove by her apartment. It was empty. Landlord said she broke the lease, paid cash, left no forwarding address. That's when I knew. She hadn't taken the inheritance and run. She had erased herself, at least from my world. She didn't want to be found, which only made me want to find her more. I didn't have money for a private investigator. What I had were the skills no one in my family had ever noticed. I was quiet, observant. I remembered things, like the name of the tattoo artist Clarissa mentioned once, laughing about a butterfly she never got, or the email signature of a friend she used to crash with in college. I started tracing threads. None of it looked like a plan, but the patterns revealed themselves slowly. A tagged photo from 2 years ago in Arizona. A GoFundMe she commented on with an old email. A job review from someone with her exact phrasing and grammar. I built a map. It took weeks. She had skipped cities like stones across water, never staying long enough to sink. But I caught up. It was Portland, eventually. A wellness startup. The founder's bio mentioned a new mindset strategist named Clara West. I clicked the photo. It was her. Shorter hair. Softer makeup. Same eyes. She looked happy. Wealthy. Safe. I didn't feel rage. Not then. Just exhaustion. Like I had been carrying someone else's luggage for years and finally realized none of it was mine. Instead of calling the police or the lawyer or even her, I did something strange. I took a walk. I walked through my old neighborhood, past the bakery Mom loved, past the bookstore we used to go to after school. I watched people talk and laugh and check their phones. I wondered how many of them had sisters and how many of those sisters had betrayed them. My hands were cold by the time I got back. I sat down, brewed a cup of tea, and began to write. Not a letter, not a story, a list. Every moment Clarissa had taken something and made me feel like I owed her for it. Every memory I'd tucked away and called family. It was longer than I expected. That week, I gathered what little proof I had. Copies of emails, the voicemail from the lawyer, my own untouched paperwork. But something told me it wasn't enough. Clarissa had always been 10 steps ahead. And if I wanted to do more than just accuse her, I had to do something she wouldn't expect. I stopped trying to chase her. I started building myself instead. I picked up freelance work, copy editing, proofreading, even writing ad copy for a woman who sold organic soap. I started saving. I started learning. Not just about fraud or family law or inheritance disputes. I started learning how to speak. Not with a soft voice, not with questions. With facts. I took a free public speaking course online. I volunteered for a local community center helping kids with homework. I didn't tell anyone about Clarissa. Not yet. It wasn't time. Months passed. I didn't check her new company's website every day. Only every week. Then every month. She was still there.
Growing.
Smiling in every team photo. Her name was listed on 2 podcasts, 3 blog features. She was a rising star in female-led entrepreneurial circles, whatever that meant. I watched, not out of jealousy, but to study, to prepare. Because the thing about stealing someone's story is, eventually, the real version catches up. And that was exactly what I was doing. A year after she disappeared, I applied to be part of a televised community project, people helping people rebuild their lives after loss. I submitted my story, not as a victim, but as someone who had learned to survive without justice. The producers loved the angle. They said I was poised, thoughtful, compelling. They didn't need to know the full truth. Just enough. I agreed. We filmed interviews, B-roll, a day in my life. They asked about my sister. I didn't lie. I just said we lost touch. They asked if I had regrets. I said only that I waited too long to rebuild. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My voice held enough weight. The episode aired on a Thursday evening. I didn't even watch it live. I went for a walk instead. Same route. Same sky. When I got home, my phone had 22 missed calls. I ignored them. I checked my email. Flooded. But one name stood out. Clarissa. No subject. Just 2 words. I saw. That's when I realized something she hadn't. She thought she had vanished. But she built her new life in the spotlight. And the moment I stepped into my own light, even briefly, she couldn't stay hidden. I went to bed that night not knowing what she'd do next. But I knew what I would do. I would wait. I would document. I would protect the truth like it was the only thing I had left. Because, in a way, it was. And sooner or later, the truth always asks for a witness. I was ready to be one. Clarissa didn't reply again. Not the next day, not the next week. But I could feel her presence everywhere, like static clinging to the edges of my life. I knew her silence wasn't passive. It was loaded. She was watching. I could tell by the sudden drop in her social media activity, the way her company's website quietly replaced her bio with a generic team lead.
No anunciament. No bubie.
It was like she'd pulled the same trick she had before, vanishing. But this time, I had left a trail. One she hadn't expected. She had built her life on the assumption that I would always stay small.
Silent.
Now that I had stepped into visibility, even briefly, she couldn't risk the spotlight. I hadn't accused her publicly. I hadn't exposed the fraud. But she was reacting like I had, which told me one thing. Guilt doesn't need an audience to perform. It panics all on its own. A month passed. I kept living. Kept working. The network reran the episode, this time with a brief follow-up interview. I shared updates on community projects, helped organize a fundraiser, started writing a column for the local paper. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. But each word I published was a seed, a message to the world that I existed, that I had value even without a last name tied to scandal. Then, on a cold Wednesday morning in March, I received a letter. Not an email. A letter, folded neatly inside a cream envelope with no return address. I almost didn't open it, but I did. Inside was a single sentence. What do you want? No signature. No name. But the handwriting was unmistakable. I didn't reply. Instead, I scanned the envelope, documented it, and tucked it into the growing file I kept labeled Clarissa, post-inheritance.
It was getting thick now.
Emails from lawyers, financial statements showing transfers I never authorized, screenshots of deleted accounts she used to funnel the money. At first, I'd kept them for legal protection. But now I realized something else. I was building a story. A true one. One that had weight and shape and consequence. I thought about writing back. Thought about saying, I want what you took. But that wasn't true. Not anymore. What I wanted now was clarity. Not revenge. Just reality. Tangible, cold, unchangeable. Then came the second twist. The call wasn't from Clarissa. It was from a woman named Ray, who introduced herself as a freelance journalist working on a feature about women rebuilding after family betrayal. She had seen the episode. Something about it resonated with her. She asked if I'd be willing to go deeper, off camera. Just a conversation. I said yes, cautiously. We met at a cafe. She was younger than I expected, with short black hair and eyes that didn't blink much. She listened more than she spoke. When I told her the inheritance part, she barely nodded. When I mentioned the forged signature, her eyes sharpened. Then she leaned forward and said something that made my pulse stop cold. She had interviewed Clarissa last year, under the name Clara West. She had done a short podcast episode on healing sibling trauma, where Clara spoke vaguely about being the family scapegoat, about financial abuse, about reclaiming her narrative. Ray hadn't thought much of it then. But after watching my interview, things clicked. She offered to send me the audio file. I listened to it that night, headphones tight, back straight. It was surreal. Clarissa's voice floated through the speakers, calm and confident, filled with the kind of curated pain that gets applause. She spoke about me without saying my name, called me the dominant sibling, the controlling one, the one who punished her for living freely. I wanted to scream. Instead, I transcribed every word, line by line. I added it to the file. I didn't know what to do next. I could go public, expose her, but something told me that wouldn't be the end. Clarissa was too slippery. She knew how to twist things, how to sound just broken enough to be believed. I needed something more. Something undeniable. So I went back to the lawyer. The same one who'd called me almost a year ago. This time, I had documents. Timelines. Proof. His assistant looked stunned when I pulled out the folders. He reviewed them, asked questions, made copies. By the end of the meeting, he leaned back and said, "This is enough to open a case. Maybe more." Still, I hesitated. Once I started this process, there would be no taking it back. It wouldn't just be about money anymore. It would be legal, public, official. Part of me still wanted to believe there was a version of Clarissa who might say sorry, who might return what she stole, or at least admit it. But that part of me was getting quieter. It had been starving too long. The final twist came when I least expected it. I was at the grocery store, grabbing apples and tea, when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around and froze. It wasn't Clarissa. It was Joy, our cousin. Younger by 5 years, quiet, sweet, the kind of person people forget is in the room until they say something piercing. She looked like she'd aged. Her eyes were sunken, her nails chewed down. She whispered my name like a prayer. Then she asked if we could talk. We sat in her car in the parking lot. And she told me everything. Clarissa hadn't just stolen from me. She had stolen from Joy, too. Manipulated her into investing in a women-led startup that didn't exist. Told her she'd double her savings in 6 months. Joy had cashed out her college fund. She never saw a cent back. When she asked about it, Clarissa ghosted her. Said Joy was codependent. I listened in silence, nausea curling in my throat. Joy dug into her purse and pulled out a crumpled notebook. Inside were pages of messages, transactions, dates. I recognized the patterns. Same tactics. Same lies. Different victim. I took the notebook home and added it to the file. Then I made a choice. I called Ray, the journalist. I told her the full story. Names, dates, fraud. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I think we have something bigger here." She pitched the story to a national outlet. They accepted. They wanted to run it as a 3-part investigative piece, exposing women-led financial fraud, focusing on families, betrayal, and the silence that enables it. I didn't flinch. I gave them everything, even the voice memo, even the screenshots. Ray promised to protect my identity until I was ready. I said I was. The article went live 2 weeks later. It didn't name Clarissa directly, but anyone who knew us would know. The fallout was immediate. Clarissa's company quietly removed all mentions of her. Former clients came forward. Joy's story was included under a pseudonym. My inbox flooded. Some people sent apologies. Some sent hate. Some sent their own stories of stolen inheritances, forged documents, manipulative siblings. I read every word. I replied to most. The silence from Clarissa was loudest of all. Then, one evening, while I was folding laundry, the news played in the background. I wasn't paying attention until I heard my name. Not the full name, just a clip of my voice from the interview. The segment was about financial abuse within families. My face appeared on screen. Clarissa saw it. I knew she did. Because not 10 minutes later, I got a message. Not a letter. Not a call. A video. Unlisted link. Just 1 minute long. Her face looked thinner. Eyes red. She said she was sorry. Said she'd return the money. Said she was unwell at the time. But the apology felt rehearsed.
Staged.
A performance for the record. I didn't reply. I uploaded the video to the cloud folder labeled evidence. Then I called the lawyer. Told him I was ready. He filed the case that Friday. But it wasn't revenge I felt. It was peace. A deep, steady kind of peace that comes when you stop asking for people to change, and instead change the way you let them touch your life. I didn't care if she repaid the money. I didn't care if she disappeared again. What I cared about was the weight in my chest that had finally lifted. The kind of weight that has nothing to do with dollars and everything to do with being seen. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was proof that no one gets to steal your truth and sell it as healing. Clarissa vanished again. But this time, I wasn't chasing. I was building. A community center in Mom's name. A scholarship for girls studying law and journalism. A podcast where people shared untold stories of financial betrayal. I didn't speak about Clarissa anymore. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken. And for once, it had spoken in my voice. The legal process moved slowly, but not silently. The moment the papers were filed, a ripple went through the small community Clarissa had built around herself. The image she'd curated, calm, spiritual, reformed, began to crack. People reached out quietly, cautiously, like approaching a wild animal that might bite. Some admitted they'd been suspicious for a long time. Others asked if it was a misunderstanding. A few accused me of jealousy, bitterness, spite. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I kept doing what I had learned to do: document, breathe, move forward. The public article had stirred something, but the lawsuit made it real. Official. Clarissa couldn't delete that. And she knew it. 3 weeks after the suit was filed, I received a certified letter from her attorney. It was a formal denial. She claimed I had fabricated the signature accusations, that I had agreed verbally to let her manage the estate after our mother's death. That part almost made me laugh. Clarissa hadn't managed anything in our family except drama. But legally, it complicated things. Without a direct confession or a video of her signing my name, the case would rely heavily on circumstantial evidence. That's when I realized I needed something more. Something undisputable. I started digging deeper into the records I had saved. Banking statements, signed forms, IP addresses from emails. I found a tiny inconsistency, a timestamp that showed an email sent under my name while I was, provably, at work with no access to my personal device. It was small, but enough to question. I took it to my lawyer. He said we might be able to subpoena digital logs. That could open the door wider. I said yes. Do it. Push it through. The twist came days later. Not from court, not from Clarissa, but from a bank employee. A woman named Nicole, who messaged me anonymously through the contact form on my community blog. She said she used to work at the regional bank where one of the inheritance transfers had occurred. She remembered Clarissa. Said she'd found her charming, but something about the transaction had felt off. She offered to talk confidentially. We met in a library. Neutral ground. Nicole slid a flash drive across the table. It contained internal communications, including one where Clarissa requested a temporary identity verification override. The email address? An old one that used to be mine in college. One only Clarissa had ever used. My hands shook slightly as I added it to the folder. It was enough to tip the scale. The judge approved a motion for a preliminary hearing. We were scheduled for early May. And just like that, the possibility of restitution became real.
But so did the risk.
Because Clarissa wasn't going down quietly. It began with small things. A fake account on social media accusing me of fraud. A blog post titled Family Feuds, When Siblings Lie for Clout, filled with vague language but obvious allusions. I didn't respond, but my lawyer flagged them. Then came the real damage. Someone had contacted the donors from my scholarship program and told them I was under investigation for financial misconduct. One of them pulled their pledge. Another asked to be removed from the sponsors page. I felt the air leave my lungs when I read the emails. I hadn't expected her to go after what I had built, but I should have. That night, I cried, not from defeat, but from sheer frustration. All this time, I had taken the higher road. Spoken through truth. Moved with caution. But she still reached for destruction. It wasn't just about the money. It never had been. It was about control. About erasure. About rewriting the story so I looked like the villain and she looked like the survivor. And still, I didn't quit. Instead, I opened a new page in my journal and wrote one sentence. Let the facts speak louder than the smear. 2 days later, the final twist I hadn't seen coming arrived in the form of a phone call. It was Ray, the journalist. Her voice was tense, urgent. She had received a tip. A whistleblower from Clarissa's old company had reached out. They claimed Clarissa had used investor funds to pay off a personal loan, one that wasn't disclosed in any financial statement. Ray didn't want to push me, but asked if I would go on record again. This time, as part of a larger expose. I didn't even pause. Yes, I said. Let's finish this. The article went live a week later. And this time, it did name Clarissa. The reaction was seismic. Within 48 hours, her company issued a statement distancing itself from her, claiming they had no prior knowledge of her legal history. A podcast she co-hosted quietly deleted the last 6 episodes. One of her partners posted a vague tweet about betrayal and disappointment. The carefully built empire collapsed like a card house in wind. But the public humiliation wasn't what satisfied me. What did was the silence. The way she stopped retaliating, stopped writing, stopped defending. I knew she was regrouping. I knew she wouldn't just vanish and stay gone. Not her. But I didn't fear her anymore. I was ready. The hearing came quickly. She didn't show up. Her lawyer did, flustered and underprepared. We submitted our files. Every receipt, every message, every forged detail. The judge didn't need long. He approved a motion to begin financial investigation and placed a freeze on the remaining estate assets under Clarissa's name. It wasn't a final ruling, but it was a win. A real one. And still, I didn't celebrate. That came later, in the smallest moment, at the edge of a Sunday evening. I was cleaning my apartment when I found a letter I hadn't opened. One from Joy. Inside was a photo. Us as kids, sitting on our grandmother's porch. Clarissa between us, smiling like nothing in the world could go wrong. On the back, Joy had written, "Some memories lie. That's why we make new ones." I taped it to my fridge. The story wasn't over yet. But for the first time, it wasn't haunting me. It was mine. The freeze on Clarissa's assets didn't break her silence, but it disrupted her carefully manicured world. Word spread through the same channels she had once used to build her reputation. The whispers that once painted her as a mentor now framed her as something else, a manipulator. But she didn't fight back, not directly. No threats, no public statement. Just quiet erasure. Her profile slowly disappeared again, her name removed from projects, events, articles. It was like watching someone sink beneath the surface, pretending it was a graceful dive. But I knew better. Clarissa wasn't hiding. She was planning. And when people like her start losing control, they don't accept it. They recalibrate. The recalibration came in the form of an unexpected visitor. It was late afternoon. I had just returned from a local conference where I'd given a short talk about financial boundaries and rebuilding after personal loss. I hadn't mentioned Clarissa by name, but I could feel the weight of her shadow behind every word. I walked through the door, set down my bag, and saw the envelope. Thick, hand-delivered, tucked beneath my doormat. Inside were two things: a printed email thread between Clarissa and a small community grant board in Oregon, and a letter addressed to whom it may concern, written by a woman named Tara. I read it once, then again, and by the third time, my hands were shaking. Clarissa had used my name again, this time to apply for a grant she wasn't eligible for. She had claimed we were co-founders of a nonprofit, even included forged documentation showing my signature. Tara, the woman who sent the letter, had worked with the grant board and had grown suspicious after seeing my recent article. She did her own digging. When she realized I'd never been to Oregon, let alone partnered with Clarissa, she sent everything. My name had been used again without my consent. Even after the lawsuit. Even after exposure. It hadn't stopped her. If anything, it had made her more reckless. I brought it to my lawyer. His expression didn't change, but I could see the flicker in his eyes, the shift from cautious confidence to readiness for war. We filed for an amendment to the case, adding the new fraud. He told me the judge might consider escalating it from civil to criminal if the pattern continued. That part made my stomach turn. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I still wasn't sure how far I was willing to go. There was a part of me, small, tired, deeply buried, that still remembered the sister who braided my hair in 3rd grade and made up bedtime songs. And that part, against all logic, still wanted to believe she could stop. But belief isn't enough. Truth is louder. A few days later, Ray called again. Her voice was sharp this time, her tone clipped. She told me someone had tried to submit a formal complaint against her for journalistic misconduct, using my case as the reason. The language mirrored things Clarissa had written before. Accusations of bias, exploitation, character assassination. But Ray had receipts. Emails, permissions, consent forms. The complaint was dismissed within 24 hours, but it made one thing clear. Clarissa was losing control. And her desperation was starting to leak through the cracks. That same night, I opened an old email account I hadn't touched in years. It was one Clarissa and I had used back when we were planning Mom's 60th birthday. It had long been dormant, buried under newsletters and spam. But now, buried among them, I found a draft. Not sent, not deleted.
Just sitting there.
The subject line was blank. The content was short. Just 3 sentences. I don't know how to be the broken one when you always wear the crown. But I never wanted to vanish. I just didn't want to be second. There was no date. No name. But I knew it was her. Knew she had typed it and never sent it. Maybe she'd logged into the account out of habit. Maybe she'd started to reach out, then lost her nerve. It didn't excuse anything. But it did explain something. Clarissa wasn't trying to destroy me because she hated me. She was trying to erase me because she couldn't bear to be compared to me. And that, more than theft, more than fraud, was the root of it all. She needed a version of the story where I was the villain, so she could be the survivor. I didn't respond. I didn't even acknowledge it. But I printed it out and added it to the file. Not as evidence for court. As evidence for myself. A reminder that sometimes, the people who hurt you the most are the ones who feel most entitled to your silence. A week before the next court date, I got a call from Joy. Her voice was thin, hesitant. She had been contacted by someone claiming to represent Clarissa's restorative justice team. They wanted to propose mediation. Off the record.
No loaders.
Just a private conversation between sisters. I didn't need time to think. I said no. Joy asked if I was sure. I told her I was. Because reconciliation isn't a substitute for accountability. And some things need to be handled in daylight, not in the dark corners where abusers rewrite their apologies into excuses. Still, the night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. I knew what I was walking into now. Not a battle with my sister. A reckoning with myself. The part of me that had stayed quiet. The part that thought if I just didn't rock the boat, I'd still be loved. That part was done waiting. And somewhere, even if she never said it, I think Clarissa knew. She didn't show up again. Her lawyer did, shuffling papers, muttering excuses about medical leave and miscommunication. But the judge wasn't interested in excuses. He reviewed the documentation, asked 2 questions, and then made a statement that silenced the room. He ruled in my favor. The ruling wasn't final, not yet. There would still be opportunities for appeal, delays, stalling tactics. But the message was clear. I had won the first fight. And more importantly, I had been believed. Afterward, I walked outside and sat on the courthouse steps for a long time. People passed, traffic hummed. The world didn't stop. But inside me, something shifted. For the first time in years, my story was whole. Not hidden. Not stolen. Not edited by someone else's shame. Still, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet, like I had stepped out of a long storm and into sunlight I'd forgotten how to feel. And yet, somewhere deep down, I knew Clarissa wasn't finished. Not completely. Because people like her don't just disappear. They reappear. With new names. New faces. New stories. But this time, when she did, I'd be ready. And so would the truth. Summer arrived without warning. The air turned heavy, the light stuck longer to the edges of the afternoon, and for the first time in a long while, I noticed the heat on my skin. Not as discomfort, as permission. I had spent the last 2 years peeling myself back from someone else's story, reclaiming each moment Clarissa had tried to erase. And now, in the quiet hum of a season I hadn't tasted fully since before Mom's funeral, I let myself exist without watching for shadows. But shadows still moved. And one, I knew, still carried my name in the wrong hands. The court's ruling had frozen what remained of Clarissa's assets and triggered an investigation into potential criminal charges. I didn't push for them. I didn't need to. I had already taken back what mattered most. My voice. But the legal machinery turned anyway, slow and certain. Her silence continued, but it changed flavor. No longer tight-lipped strategy, but retreat. The social media accounts remained scrubbed, the email addresses dormant. Her old phone number went from voicemail to disconnected. No one had heard from her. Or so I thought. Until a postcard arrived. It was tucked in with the usual stack of mail, hidden between a dental reminder and a grocery flyer. No return address. Just a smudged coastal stamp and a photo of a beach I couldn't place. On the back, 6 words, written in handwriting so familiar it felt like muscle memory. I always hated that you stayed.
No signature. No explanation.
Just a sentence that twisted like a blade not because it hurt, but because it told me she was still watching. And still blaming me for surviving what she didn't have the strength to face. I brought it to my lawyer. He kept it for the record, though it meant nothing legally. Just noise. But to me, it was a final flare, one last shot from a distance. A reminder that even in absence, Clarissa still wanted to narrate. Still wanted to sting. I smiled, faintly, as he filed it away. That was the difference now. Her words no longer shaped me. They only echoed. And echoes can't change the room once the doors are closed. Then came the final twist, and I hadn't seen it coming. It wasn't Clarissa. It was Mom. Or rather, a box in her handwriting, found deep in the back of the attic when Joy helped me sort through old keepsakes we had stored away after the funeral. The label read simply, "To be opened after." I almost didn't open it. I didn't think I could carry one more layer. But I did. Inside were photos, a stack of letters, and a will. Not the one we'd been given. Not the one Clarissa had forged her name onto. This was handwritten, dated 6 months earlier than the lawyer's version. It was witnessed.
Signed. Sealed.
And in it, Mom had left the entire inheritance to me. All of it. The house, the savings, the trust, everything. Not out of favoritism, but because she had already given Clarissa something else. A loan. A large one. documented in a separate folder inside the box. It was clear. Clarissa had asked for it when I was out of town, promising to pay it back in monthly installments. She never had. But Mom had forgiven the debt quietly and restructured the will to reflect that. She never told me. I imagined she didn't want to cause more tension. She thought she had more time. I sat on the attic floor, surrounded by paper ghosts and truths too late to rewrite, and cried. Not because I was vindicated, but because I finally understood. Mom hadn't chosen me over Clarissa. She had simply tried to make things fair. But Clarissa had taken that fairness and twisted it into injury, had hidden the updated will, altered the legal copy, and then disappeared with the story bent in her favor. The final blow had never come from me. It had always come from Clarissa before I ever lifted a finger to fight back. The next week, I submitted the new will through my lawyer. The probate court accepted it after verification. The forged will became part of the growing criminal case. But for me, it was already over. I didn't want to fight anymore. I just wanted to live. With truth, not vengeance. And I did. The community center I'd named after Mom held its first summer camp for girls interested in law and journalism. Joy taught one of the writing workshops. We sat together after the first session, watching the girls run through the courtyard, their voices unburdened and bold. She turned to me and said, "You did it." And for once, I didn't correct her. Because I had. One evening, as dusk stretched long across my window, I stood looking at the photo Joy had once sent, the three of us on Grandma's porch. I still didn't know where Clarissa was. But I knew she had seen the articles. I knew she had read the judgment. And I knew the last time she wrote my name, she did it with shaking hands. Not because I threatened her. Because I didn't need to. The truth had done it for me. I never received another letter.
No epaleri. No confrontation.
But months later, through a friend who worked in publishing, I heard Clarissa had submitted a manuscript under a pen name. A memoir. The title was vague, something about finding yourself through family fracture. But the synopsis? It was unmistakably hers. And mine. And twisted. She still wanted to be the storyteller. I considered sending a cease and desist. Then I didn't. Because the world had already heard my version and more importantly, I had. And that version didn't need editing. One final time, I sat down at my kitchen table. Not with anger. Not with paperwork. Just a teacup, a pen, and a small white card. I wrote one sentence. I forgave her, but I remembered everything. I slipped it into the photo frame beside Mom's picture. That winter, snow came early. I set the table again. No holiday, just dinner. Joy came. 2 others from the center joined. There was music. There was laughter. No drama. No silence that cut. Just space that healed. The seat Clarissa once occupied remained empty. But I didn't mourn it, because I hadn't lost a sister. I had let go of a version of her I no longer needed to carry. The house, the money, the court case, they were just details. The real inheritance? My voice. And this time I knew exactly how to use it.